Big changes could be coming to the criminal justice system. The federal Liberals are trying for a second time to get rid of mandatory minimum sentences. Here's what you need to know about the retabled bill. Government wants to drop these minimum penalties for drug offences and some firearm offences. Studies suggest minimum sentences disproportionately hurt Indigenous and Black offenders as well as those struggling with addiction. Now, the government also wants to give judges more discretion in sentencing. If someone isn't a public safety threat, a judge can order house arrest or a curfew or counseling. And police and prosecutors could look at alternative penalties for simple drug possession, something like addiction treatment. The Liberals tabled a bill almost identical to this one earlier this year, but then, of course, it died during the federal election. David Lametti is the Minister of Justice. He's in Ottawa, and we want to get to this topic in a moment, but just in the last hour, the Liberal government's bill to ban conversion therapy passed the Senate. Minister Lametti, very good to have you on the program. Lots to talk about. We will get to mandatory minimum sentencing in just a moment, but some news out of the Senate today, conversion therapy passing. Did you expect that piece of legislation would go through Parliament this quickly?
Well, this piece of legislation has been surprising me at every stage, so I'm really pleased. I'm thankful to the Senate for having dealt with this so quickly. We had heard rumors that there were negotiations underway to get this bill through quickly, but the Senate is an independent place, and so I'm just thankful. This is a great day for Canadians. This is a fantastic day for people to be who they are and to love who they want to love. I'm just so pleased, and I thank the Senate for their expeditious work on this. All we need now is royal assent, and hopefully that will happen expeditiously.
If your face is a tell at all, and we're not playing poker here, but if your face is a tell, you look surprised.
I'm surprised, and I am just so profoundly happy. I'm so profoundly happy.
So just shifting gears, I want to talk about the new bill, the one introduced today that would eliminate mandatory minimum sentences for 14 of the 67 offences in the criminal code. Why is the time right now to do this?
Well, the statistical evidence is overwhelming. The minimum mandatory penalties just don't work. So 14 criminal code offences. The total is 20 criminal code and controlled substances.
Yep.
So they don't work. They end up incarcerating Indigenous and Black Canadians, marginalized Canadians, and they don't work in criminal law terms. They don't have a positive impact on recidivism. They tend to over-punish people who ought to be treated elsewhere, ought to be helped elsewhere. Other countries are abandoning them, including the sort of rock-solid conservative jurisdictions in the United States. So their time has come and frankly gone. It's time to move past them and go back to more proactive forms of sentencing that allow us to tailor punishments to actually fit the crime. Okay,
so you're going to face critique from both sides on this. So let me start on one side of it, and that's the notion of the Liberals are not being tough on crime here. And I would take you to the suburbs, many of the suburbs which are so politically important in this country. We've gone through an election recently, and if you'd been doing this in the lead up to the election, surely someone would have said, well, look, they're letting criminals get away with stuff. How do you respond to those people who will be worried about what they're seeing today?
We targeted pretty precisely gun offenses, for example, as offenses that overrepresent Black and Indigenous people, and the kinds of offenses that we targeted. So basic possession offenses, for example, and nothing that touches prohibited weapons, nothing that touches handguns, nothing that touches assault rifles, nothing that touches organized crime or gangs. Mm-hmm. And so the people who are targeted here are, the people who use a long gun because they're desperate. The case that I mentioned in the press conference of a young guy who put a few bullets into the side of an empty building after having had a few drinks on a Friday night, didn't hurt anyone, reported by the neighbors, ends up 4 years in jail. Those are the kinds of crimes that we're targeting. They tend to be a number of the crimes that account for the overrepresentation, and so this is the time. But more generally, we're turning the ship around on this failed policy of tough on crime. It simply hasn't worked. We need to be smarter on crime. We need to tailor punishments to fit the crimes.
Yeah.
And I would add, David, that we're adding more flexibility once again that Harper's government had taken away on conditional sentencing orders.
Okay, so let's just for a moment, if we could just talk about, from the other end of things, and that is the criticism that you are now facing that the legislation you've proposed is not enough, and in fact there are those who are suggesting it's not even what you suggested it was going to be before. And so I would throw a scenario at you because, as you note, Indigenous people in particular are vastly overrepresented in the prisons in this country, Indigenous women among them. So what is the difference, say, between an Indigenous woman who is in an abusive relationship and ends up in a violent altercation in which a spouse dies or is seriously injured? She gets charged. She faces now something that still has mandatory minimum sentencing. Your bill doesn't change that, versus, say, a man who is the abuser who goes and kills his wife. Why are those two scenarios still on the same level playing field when it comes to mandatory minimum sentences?
Well, look, we targeted a number of sentences quite particularly, and I would say with respect to Indigenous women, a number of the very low level, the drug offenses that we're targeting here are particularly pertinent to the overrepresentation of Indigenous women. Mm-hmm. So, and this is contributing to clogging up the court system as well. So all of this will be helpful. Look, this is an important step in the turning this ship around, this tough on crime ship. I'm the first Justice Minister in recent memory, and perhaps ever in Canada, to roll back minimum mandatory penalties. So I'm proud of this bill. Let's not minimize the importance of this step. And certainly we'll continue to look at other ways with respect to the other examples that you've given me to make the system more efficient and to make the system more sensitive to both perpetrators and victims. Let's not forget victims in all of this, who are ill-served by a number of minimum mandatory penalties that just end up clogging up the criminal justice system. Okay,
so let me just go back to the scenario in which I presented, and I'll be shorter this time, and say, why is it level playing field? Why is there still minimum mandatory sentences? The very thing you say is problematic within the judicial system right now. Why do those still exist for some offenses? Why is it a single approach for all offenders?
Well, look, in both cases, you've got very serious criminal activity happening. I realize that there's a context there, and we'll continue to be vigilant with respect to how to better improve the criminal justice system moving forward. But once again, the offenses that we're targeting here are drug offenses and what I would call low-level possession offenses with respect to weapons, and then offenses with certain kinds of weapons, mainly long guns.
While we're talking about decriminalization, and we've not focused on the component of drug use in our conversation so far, but I'd like to do that now, and I'd like to look at the Toronto Board of Health, which I'm sure will come as no surprise to you, voted yesterday in favor of decriminalization of possession of small amounts of simple drugs. Is this something that you are inclined to support?
Well, look, as my colleague Carolyn Bennett has said, we will look carefully at all of the various requests that come, Toronto, Vancouver, British Columbia, looking at what can be done under Section 56 of the Health Act. What I have done in this particular bill, within the larger ambit of sentencing and the way criminal prosecutions advance, is to give police officers and prosecutors the discretion to channel people out of the criminal justice system from the get-go, to keep them out of the criminal justice system, and into the kinds of support that they need. So this reinforces a similar kind of message within the ambit of what I'm trying to do, but that certainly doesn't preclude us from looking carefully at other steps, and Minister Bennett has indicated that she's willing to lead our government on that particular question.
On the question of, and I'll be very brief in asking you this, on the question of those who have been convicted of drug possession in the past, would your government be open to removing that from a criminal record in the near future?
That's certainly an important issue, and I know that having something on the record can be a weight on a person's record moving forward for all kinds of reasons. Minister Mendicino, as Minister of Public Safety, has that as part of his portfolio. I know that Minister Blair, prior to him, had begun to take steps with respect to the facilitation, if you will, of the pardon system. But there's certainly more work to be done, and I will work diligently with Minister Mendicino on anything that he might bring forward.
All right, Minister Lametti, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, David.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.